Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar from the Institute for Research on Poverty and the Wisconsin Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board. Today's webinar is called Strategies for Involving and Engaging Fathers in Programming. The Prevention Board is a state agency that advances statewide policy, public awareness, and evidence-informed programming to strengthen families and reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect, and it seeks to address those goals through the mobilization of research and best practices. And IRP is based at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and is the sole national poverty research center funded by ASPE at the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. I'm Dave Chancellor, and I'm on staff at IRP, and I'll be your host today. And I'm so pleased to introduce our presenters for this webinar. Our main presenter today is Dr. Tova Walsh, and she's an assistant professor in the School of Social Work here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a research affiliate of the Institute for Research on Poverty. We're also fortunate to have three practitioners on the line with us today who will be sharing their experiences and advice for all of you. So we'll be hearing from Darrell Davidson, who's the Men's Health Manager at the City of Milwaukee, Patrick Fent of the Parenting Network, also based out of Milwaukee, and Lauren Zach of the Indianhead Community Action Agency out of northwestern Wisconsin. And we'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about all of our presenters in just a moment here. But Tova, Darrell, Patrick, and Lauren, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
I also want to acknowledge the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at the Department of Health and Human Services for their support of this webinar series from the IRP side. That said, any views expressed in today's webinar don't necessarily reflect any positions of ASPE, the Institute for Research on Poverty, or the Wisconsin Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board. So as we get started, let me give you a quick outline of our webinar today. We have an hour, and our presentation will take about 45 minutes. After that, we'll save the last 15 minutes or so for your questions. A lot of you submitted questions during registration, and many of those will be addressed during the webinar today. But you should also feel free to type questions you have into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar as we go along. And we'll get to as many of those as we can before our time's up. So with that, Tova, Darrell, Patrick, and Lauren, thank you all for being here. And Tova, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Dave, and thank you both to the Institute for Research on Poverty and the Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board for hosting this webinar today. I'm really delighted to have such a great team of folks joining me, and really excited about the conversation ahead. So thanks to all of you who are listening in and who took the time also to ask questions, many of you, even before we get started today. So we're going to start by introducing ourselves. So I'll introduce myself first, and then be turning one at a time to my co-presenters, just to tell you a little bit about ourselves and get you a little bit oriented to the backgrounds that we bring to our topic today, which is strategies for involving and engaging fathers in programming. I do just want to make a couple of quick points before we get started. First, I want to acknowledge the questions that many of you submitted and let you know that there were so many of them that unfortunately we're not going to be able to respond to every single one of them in the course of our hour together. But I have my contact information at the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to follow up over email. And also, we will kind of hold on to these questions and think about these as topics for future consideration for webinars or other programming. So now I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to focus on both strengthening engagement of fathers with their children and engagement of fathers within social services. So I am a social work professor, as Dave told you, at UW-Madison. But before that, I was a home visitor, and I worked with families during pregnancy and with children up to 3 years old. And I worked in agencies that used the language of family support and parent education, but really primarily meant mothers. So I was trained to work with a dyad, and I really had to kind of innovate and fumble and try and kind of figure out how I could pull in fathers and how I could do more to be engaging whole families. So it came to be, a big interest for me, and I would talk about it with my coworkers and colleagues. And then when I went to graduate school to do my PhD, I started pursuing, from a research perspective, and learning more about how we can engage fathers effectively, kind of what is known and what it remains to be known about the specific needs of fathers and how programs are responding to those needs. So I'll be getting into the research in a little bit, but now I want to first just offer my co-presenters a chance to introduce themselves to you. So I'm going to turn first to Darrell Davidson and ask Darrell if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Darrell Davidson. I am the program manager for the City of Milwaukee Health Department's Men's Health Program. I am also the supervisor for the Direct Assistance to Dads Project, which is a voluntary, intensive, and long-term home visiting service to fathers who are willing to be a part of a program that promotes and serves them in the healthy growth and the development of their children. My background is in biological sciences, and I came to public health as an individual who primarily worked with men through HIV and STIs, and then gradually attained skills in managing programs around teens and adolescents. And ultimately, we created what's called a Men's Health Center, which specifically focused on providing one-stop shop services for men. And now I have expanded that into working specifically with fathers in a home visiting setting.
Thank you so much, Darrell. So I'm going to next ask Patrick Fent, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Patrick Fent. I'm the Director of Parent Education at the Parenting Network. I've been doing nurturing parenting, in Spanish, Crianza con Cariño, with Walker's Point and several other agencies for more than 25 years. And I did a stint as a stay-at-home dad when my youngest was born. I came to the Parenting Network about 6 years ago and began teaching their cooperative co-parenting class, which is a required course for parents of minor children getting a divorce, so talking to mothers and fathers at a difficult time in their life and trying to get them to focus on, well, parenting together. I also did a class with St. Joseph's Hospital called Centering Pregnancy, which is for parents, parents waiting for their baby to be born, and we were working on parenting issues that they might have as their child was born and getting prepared for that. I'm also a Triple P accredited parenting education instructor, and at the Parenting Network we do a lot of parenting programs, for some just for dads, some for males and female parents, and some, like I mentioned already, for new parents. One of the things that I think is really important about being a dad is being accessible to your children, and we often think of our role as shaping children, setting them right, and giving them on the right path. And so I love this little picture of my daughter shaping me, because that's, to me, the exciting part of parenting is how your children change you. So I'm big on that.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to turn now to Lauren Zach.
Hi, I'm Lauren, and I am the Family Services Coordinator over at Indianhead Community Action Agency. I'm based out of Ladysmith, Wisconsin, but we serve a wide rural community, over 6 counties. Some of our centers are about 4 hours away from each other, so we cover a lot of ground. A lot of ground, but not a lot of people. So I have been with Head Start for 5 years. My background, I have a bachelor's in criminal justice, and my master's is in family studies and interventions. My passion for the Fatherhood program that we just started in the last year is I moved from Minneapolis, Wisconsin to this rural area where my husband's from, and he was always talking about stuff that him and his mom and his brothers and sisters, but never his dad, because his dad worked out in the woods, or most dads around here work on the road. And now that I have 2 children, my husband works on the road, so I'm always trying to find ways to have family activities. And it seems that out in our rural areas, that's kind of what all the dads do out here, is they're either on the road, they're out in the woods working, or things of that. So how can we plan events around that dads can still be involved, and how can we cater to the area that we live in? And so that's something that I've been working on the last year, with some struggles, some successes, but we're kind of new to it all, and I'm excited to hear about some of the things other people are doing and go from there.
Thank you, Lauren. So I am just thrilled that we have 3 program leaders from Wisconsin on the webinar today. As you can hear, they represent a wide range of agencies and have varying experiences, but a lot of experiences between them. And so you'll get to hear more from each of them about both successes and challenges, as Lauren said. And so I'm looking forward to doing that as we go on. So I'm going to move now into some of the content of our webinar. So first, I just want to say a few words about inclusion as we get started. And so what I wanted to say here, First is that as we're talking about the contributions of fathers and the importance of engaging fathers, I want to be clear that that is not to diminish the important contributions of mothers. And so sometimes when we talk about fathers, people feel like it is somehow carving out a space that then kind of takes away from mothers. And in fact, what we're trying to do today is think about all of the important caregivers in children's lives and the unique contributions that they make and the important contributions both individually and collectively that they make to the lives of children. And as we think about fathers, we're going to be talking today about all of the folks who play fathering roles. So thinking about biological fathers, foster and adoptive fathers, social fathers, stepfathers, maybe grandfathers who play a fathering role in the life of a child. We want to kind of keep that full range of fatherhood in mind and recognize that there's a lot of diversity within the term of fathers. And so as we talk about dads today, just asking you to hold on to that, think about the very different contexts in which fathers do their fathering. So an outline of where we're going today, I'm going to present a little bit of background information and talk about some of the barriers for fathers to getting involved in programming. Then we're going to talk about how you can assess your agency's father friendliness. Then we'll get into strategies for involving and engaging fathers in programming. And throughout each of those earlier sections of the presentation, you'll be hearing from my co-presenters as well. But then in particular, when we get to this pro tips area, each of my co-presenters is going to take a few minutes to share some of their insights from the work that they do. And then at that point, we'll move into questions and discussion. And we look forward to kind of hearing your thoughts and bringing you into the conversation then. So now I'm going to move into some background. The first thing that I want to start off by saying is just kind of to frame this in terms of why it's so important that we think about engaging fathers effectively in programming. There's just a growing body of research, a really substantial body of research at this point, to show that positive father involvement is associated with improved outcomes for children across many domains. So improved social, emotional, and cognitive outcomes from infancy to adolescence. And in a webinar that we held last month, we talked more about that. And for folks who may be interested in that, the recording is available both through the Institute for Research on Poverty and through the Prevention Board. And so I encourage you to check that out if that is an interest and you were not able to join us last month. We also just want to frame this a little bit in terms of why involving fathers in interventions is so important. And so there is a growing body of research to show that father inclusion in interventions is associated not only with benefits for fathers themselves, but also benefits for mothers and children. So father participation is associated with an increase in mother service engagement and with improved child outcomes across a number of child and family interventions, including parent training programs, family therapy, and permanency planning. A few words about the context for engaging fathers in services. So you heard some the examples given by my co-presenters. Darrell mentioned the program that he is involved with, the DAD project that is designed very specifically for fathers, the home visiting program that he mentioned. A number of parent programs, including many home visiting programs, for example, were initially designed with mothers in mind. And so programs are now kind of opening up and thinking about how to expand their repertoire to serve fathers more effectively. So one piece of context as you think about different services is to consider kind of who they were designed for and how they might need to be opened up to respond to the needs of fathers if that isn't kind of who they were initially developed for. To the extent that programs have evaluated their outcomes, quite a few of the programs that serve families and children have not yet examined the role of fathers specifically and look to see, when fathers are involved, does that change outcomes for children and families? Another point about the context for engaging fathers in services is that there is a growing body of research that shows that for vulnerable fathers in particular, that early childhood is the time when fathers tend to be most involved. And so there's this window of opportunity around the birth of a baby to engage fathers and try and support fathers in setting up positive trajectories of involvement. And so a lot of efforts have concentrated on things like perinatal home visiting programs and other early interventions to think about supporting and sustaining fathers who face barriers to maintaining their involvement with their children, to help them to find ways of staying consistently and substantially involved in ways that are positive for their children. So some of the domains in which interventions with fathers have been attempted are things like prenatal support, labor and delivery involvement, smoking cessation, men as breastfeeding allies, parenting preparation, perinatal home visiting, parent education, parenting support, programs centered on employment, literacy, and economic stability, and then programs on relationship enhancement and co-parenting. So these are just some of the many domains where programs are seeking to work with fathers, but these are some of the more prominent ones and some of the ones that we will be referring to as we proceed.
If I could just say something here about interventions and getting parents to come early.
Absolutely.
Just, when I was doing the Centering Pregnancy program, the mothers are, of course, going through the pregnancy and experiencing the feelings in their body, and they're being given a lot of advice by nurses and doctors and things. And I found that it's very helpful for fathers to be in the room, to be a second pair of ears, to actually hear what's being said and then say, isn't that what the doctor said we should be worried about? Or isn't that what the doctor said, isn't something we need to worry about? And so it's just so important to because it's new for the mom, it's also new for the dad, but 4 years is better than 2.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Patrick. And actually, that's one of the areas that I study is it relates to that. So I've done a series of interviews with dads during pregnancy and mothers as well. And what I hear from both partners is that in both directions, having the extra pair of ears is helpful. So remembering the things that the doctors say, and then also remembering, at home as questions and concerns come up, if moms and dads are talking about them, if they're then at the visits together, it's two people who can kind of remember the questions that they wanted to bring. And so in both directions, I think you're right that there's that extra value from having 4 ears, as you said. Thanks. So we're going to move now into talking about some barriers that fathers face to getting involved in programs. And so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about provider barriers, so barriers that can be presented by providers. So when providers don't extend an active invitation to fathers to participate, that can be a barrier. If fathers are not clear on if the program is open to them or the extent to which they are kind of welcome, or if they're considered just extra or optional, they might be less likely to engage or just really not feel sure that it's their place to be part of the programming. When providers bring biases, so for example, not considering father participation important, or concerns about fathers representing risk to their family as opposed to also thinking about the benefits and the resource that fathers can bring and can be to their children, those biases can also present an obstacle to fathers getting involved. Another barrier is providers' discomfort with conflict between parents. So when you are working with mothers and fathers together, then you've got this extra set of dynamics in the room. You're not only focused on the dynamics between parent and child, you're focused also on the dynamics between parents. And when providers are uncomfortable with tension or conflict between parents, that can be a barrier. And then another one is when providers are unsure when and how to involve fathers. So if there's no clear policy at the agency regarding engaging fathers, providers might not be sure about what to do or when to do it in order to engage fathers. So I'm going to turn to Darrell now and ask if you could tell us a little bit about how you think about first impressions and what providers can do to reduce barriers to fathers getting involved.
First impressions are very essential to the relationship. And often what providers will do in a home visiting setting, if they haven't been trained in the process, they will walk past the father, and that reinforces the stereotype that the father really is a secondary parent or a backup parent. It doesn't really have value. And what we're looking for is someone who acknowledges that the child is a part of both parents and that the child is a very important part of the parent's life. And this father does care about the individuals who are in the household. Now, it's true that some of the fathers may not even admit that they feel this way, but often when we're finding that they're talking about it will be when we're in a group of all fathers and the subject does come up. And then we notice there are large numbers of dads who say they experienced the same thing even when they were going through their birthing classes, and it perpetuated itself through home visits. So what we like to see is a holistic approach where the people who are doing the education or the home visiting at first introduce themselves to the father and talk to him about his importance in the child's life, and then make sure to come into that environment with very specific resources directed toward fathers.
Thank you, Darrell. So now we're going to talk about some other types of barriers that fathers may face. So these include practical and motivational barriers. So on the practical side, these include things like instability. So if a father's schedule is not consistent, if he has intermittent employment or other circumstances that might make planning difficult, that can present a barrier to getting involved and remaining involved in programming. Other forms of instability could include things like interrupted housing, and that could make it difficult, again, to plan and to follow through. So scheduling, time constraints, transportation, these kinds of things can represent practical challenges. Competing responsibilities means thinking about all the many other demands on a father's time. So when we think about the time that he's trying to spend in this program, that has to be balanced against also the time that he needs to devote to work or to searching for work, to his family commitments. But anytime we're trying to engage fathers in programming, we have to think about it in the context of all the other demands on their time. Another barrier is when the benefits of participating in the program is not clear. So a father may not immediately see the potential benefits of participating if it's not made very clear kind of what that would be for him and for his family. Another barrier can be not seeing other male participants participating, not seeing male program staff, anything that might make it seem less apparent that this is a program that really is kind of welcoming and intended for him. And then another barrier has to do with motivation, and that could have to do with times when the relationship is fraught between a father and the child's mother. Sometimes it can be difficult or complicated to engage in family programming if there are those tensions present. So I'm going to turn now to Lauren and ask you a little bit about some of the practical barriers that you face in your community to engaging fathers in programming.
Yes, so I'm not really sure where everybody is from and on this webinar, but to give you guys a little backstory, so most of the communities that I live in, the towns that we live in, are less than 3,000, 4,000 people. So it's very small areas. A couple are unincorporated. So we have very limited jobs in our area. We have a couple factories where most of our dads work at, and those can be long hours, 10-hour shifts. Sometimes it's 10 hours, 4 days a week, so Fridays are their only days off, or a lot of people pick up overtime. But the lack of job results in a lot of our fathers working on the road, including my husband as well. So they're gone 6 months out of the year, usually home on the weekends. If it's pipeline, they're usually gone months at a time, and then only home for a short amount of time. So the dad kind of picks up that role in this area. We have a lot of stay-at-home moms because daycare is another thing that we just do not have. If families don't qualify for Head Start or Early Head Start, the daycare is very limited in our area. And then you talk about male program staff. Out of our 105 employees, 2 are male staff that are actually in the classroom. We have a couple male staff that are bus drivers. And so it's just all about, when do we get dads engaged? Those are the barriers that we've been running into. What can we do that even on their days off, when they're tired from working all these hours, what can we do to get them in the classroom and involved? So those are some of the barriers that we have really been running into. And we have a few things that we've done that I think we talk about later that have helped us get over those barriers. But those are some of the things that in our area we're really running into issues. And, you know, if dads are gone that often and we have to do home visits, you know, we're typically only doing home visits with the mom because they're the only ones available. And so how do we reach out and make the dads feel as involved when we have all of these outlying barriers to get past?
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And we will come back to some of the strategies that you have come up with for trying to overcome those barriers. So now I want to talk just a little bit about motivational barriers. So the kinds of barriers where a father may see a program as potentially unnecessary, or he might see it as maybe irrelevant or a program that's not intended for fathers, some of the kind of motivational barriers that can get in the way of participating. Patrick, can you tell us a little bit about any kind of motivational barriers that you've seen fathers encounter?
Yeah. Well, actually, I wanted to talk about some other things a little bit.
Oh, sure. Okay, go for it.
So one thing is, when there is conflict, I think you need to really find positive labels for what people are using with each other. Often we hear that the deadbeat dad or the absent dad, and we have to find a way to say something different, like he's finding other ways to demonstrate his care, he's finding other ways to get involved. Sometimes the dad is too strict or is a good time dad, and how do we put a value on what the dad Dad's overriding messages? Is it responsibility? Is it getting along? Is it adventure? And making sure that we also have the dad giving that same respect to the mom's role, that it's not just that it's seen in a positive light, in a nurturing light. And so I think that's an important part, is to nip that kind of conversation in the bud if you find negative labels by people, because that can be unmotivating. We have to keep inviting men to come and to challenge them to come and to impress upon people that the default is that every kid needs a mom and a dad. And barring any horror story, and I've heard a few in the classes that I've given, I still say, and yet, what does it say to a kid who can't talk about his dad, can't talk about his mom because of what you feel about him? And so that's an important thing. And I guess I don't know if I have a strategy, but I was having a conversation with a mother who was in a class that I was teaching because she was having some trouble with her 5-year-old. She was also very visibly pregnant. And I started talking about the father's importance and the involvement, and she said, yeah, we don't get along. I think he's a bad influence and all that. And then she also let on that it's a different father for the current pregnancy. And I said, well, is he going to be involved? And we keep asking this question, and she broke down in tears. And I thought I had stepped on the wrong thing. And the week later, she came back with the boyfriend who's father of the child she was carrying. And I was just like, wow, I guess something happened, And we can't be afraid to, I guess, push the envelope to get people to really think about what they want to do with, as far as involving the partner that they have. And so that's my reflections on that as a topic.
Great. Thank you, Patrick.
I had something to add about motivational barriers also.
Please do, yeah.
We do have, I'm again from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so it's an urban environment. We have multiple races, ethnicities, and cultures who are recruited for our DAD project. The fact of the matter is, it's often that some of our clients do not have a father in their life, or their experience with a father was an individual who may have been in the home, and the role was a very distant role. And so there are barriers to their hearing certain examples and listening to some of the, participating in some of the activities that we might share with them, because they might believe that that's not the role that was introduced to them as being the father's part in a family. And also we have other individuals who are coming out of incarceration and other settings where they might be attached to any type of legal situation, so it could be child support and others. So they may feel powerless, and therefore the result has been, whatever you say, we'll do it. Let me just get through this program. And we're trying to make sure that they're completely engaged, that they're learning, and that ultimately they're experiencing a relationship with their child that they wouldn't have had we not been a part of their life, and that's why we function as their advocate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Very important points, and please do keep jumping in. So I am going to just move us now to talking a little bit about how an agency can assess your father friendliness. And I want to share a resource here. You'll see a link at the bottom of the slide here. So this comes from the Best Start Resource Center Step-by-Step Engaging Fathers and Programs for Families manual. And so the manual in its entirety is available online, and I'll excerpt a couple of things during our presentation today, but I encourage you to check it out. But this is a tool for assessing your father friendliness and starting to think about how your program is approaching fathers, and the kind of preparation that your staff might have to understand the role that men play in children's lives, the belief that fathers might have that there is value in using your program or not. So a set of questions that you can see here and can use kind of on your own time with an agency to go through and do kind of a self-reflection process and think about where there might be room to grow. And so now we're going to move into strategies for involving and engaging fathers. So we talked a little bit about the barriers, but I think what we're all kind of excited to get into is, so recognizing those barriers, now what can we do? And we have a lot of wisdom among my three co-presenters here that I'm looking forward to drawing on and that you'll all kind of get to hear from as we move through. So we're going to go through a set of strategies, and we're going to also try and bring those to life with some examples from the field. So some strategies for involving and engaging fathers. So one just starts with communicating with fathers, and so being very explicit that fathers are welcome, reaching out directly and letting fathers know that these programs are not only open to them, but really kind of welcoming and eager for them to participate. That includes reaching out to non-resident fathers, and so sometimes that'll mean sending kind of more than one communication. You need to have, addresses on file for both parents and be able to kind of reach out and extend invitations when events and activities are happening. And to the extent that it's possible addressing some of the practical barriers that we were just talking about, so adjusting scheduling, kind of being flexible around kind of work schedules or other commitments that people have, and thinking about how to create a father-friendly environment. So kind of from the very first impression, as Darrell was talking about, not walking past, but instead really connecting and taking the time to issue a warm welcome, to greet by name, and to offer materials meant for fathers, images of fathers when you're putting out, brochures or materials, to make sure that those are reflective of fathers as well, so that they can kind of see themselves as part of the programming. Another important strategy is to presume high interest. So when you're encountering fathers, not to kind of minimize their interest in their children or minimize their interest in the program, but to really kind of assume that they want to be great dads, that they want to be involved in their children's lives, and to start from that place of assuming that positive interest and intention. And to seek opportunities to reinforce fathers' contributions, to recognize and appreciate all the different ways that fathers are contributing. And Patrick provided some really great language before for thinking about recognizing a range of contributions, so that even at tough moments you can find something kind of positive to acknowledge and to work from.
I would just piggyback on that, just
yes,
to say,
please.
Have activities. Dads like to do something. They don't want to just talk or gab, as they might call it. And drawing, role-playing, mixed media, get them involved in something more complicated and maybe slightly messy. That's probably going to make them feel a little more comfortable. One of the things that I have also found doing a lot of work with the Spanish-speaking community in Milwaukee is that after I do a class, I always have the men coming up to shake my hand and say, gracias por todo que ha hecho y todo eso. They're just coming, they need a way to say thank you for what they've done and thank you for what they've given, what the program is offering. And sometimes that's before the class starts and sometimes it's after, but you just have to be present for those moments and really see how people want to acknowledge and participate, as well as continuing to invite them to participate.
Thank you. Before I go to the next slide, Darrell or Lauren, did you want to add anything there?
Well, for that one, planning is key. Always be sure that you plan ahead, you have a strategy, you have an idea of what types of things that the fathers want because you asked the fathers in advance, and try to focus on a specific type of father versus trying to have experiences with every father available. So have a program focus. For us specifically, it's the fathers of young children as well as expectant fathers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we sent out at the beginning of the year, fatherhood surveys. What's your work schedule like? What days and times are you available? What are some activities you like to do with your kids? What are some activities you would like to do with your kids but don't necessarily have the means to do it? And so we sent that out ahead of time and brought all that data together to kind of plan our events around that. I also sent that information to our home visitors so that they kind of know for their parent nights what to do. And we also changed some of our wording around. So instead of be your child's first teacher, we did be your child's first coach, so that it kind of just changing that wording a little bit maybe felt dads feel more involved, because sometimes in our community when we talk about be your child's first teacher, get involved in the classroom, since we have so many female teachers, it just feels more of like the mom's role. So when we put be your child's first coach, it kind of opened that door up to the dads a little more. And when we call and set up home visits, if the dad answers, don't ask for mom right away. I catch a lot of my home visitors doing that because that's what they're comfortable with. But, talking to dad, saying, when are you available to do a home visit, and trying to get them to schedule it and be a part of that as much as possible.
Thank you. So some additional points here. One is to consider who's doing the outreach to dads, as well as who's providing the services and who's participating. So can fathers see themselves in the programming? And so sometimes that's through having male staffing. Sometimes it's through having fathers who have participated in the programming become kind of ambassadors and have kind of volunteers and roles to reach out to other fathers. But father-to-father strategies are kind of critical to think about. And I think across the 3 programs that are represented on our webinar today, folks have had different experiences with this that we'll hear about in a little bit. But it's really important to keep in mind that when there's programming where fathers are really outnumbered, like if a dad is showing up to a parenting group that is entirely moms until he walks into the room, it's going to be hard to feel like it's a place where he belongs and that he's not kind of crashing into an event. So keeping in mind how to create kind of spaces where fathers will have other fathers around to feel that the space is a place where they're wanted and where they can share experiences with other fathers who can relate and might understand and be able to share similar kind of experiences. So you gave the example, Lauren, of the surveys that you put out at the start of the year about scheduling. So one thing that we can think about doing is learning what fathers want and offering it, and learning when they're available and trying to meet those needs. So if you're not sure what the fathers in your community are looking for from your agency, taking some time to do a little bit of an inventory and kind of hear what are folks looking for, recognizing that there's going to be diversity across fathers in terms of what they're looking for, and that it's important too to think about kind of individual circumstances and what specific support needs might be for individual fathers. Within an agency, you're going to be able to do only so much, and so another thing is to be able to offer resources and help people connect and collaborate with other providers to be able to get fathers connected to programming that might address some of the range of needs that they might have. So thinking about kind of what's available in your community, what you can offer within your program, and what you can help people to get connected to. And then another strategy is to think about moments of opportunity. And so one that Darrell highlighted, he talked about in his work working with expectant and new fathers. So the transition to fatherhood is a time that's often seen as a moment of opportunity when people have really kind of high hopes and expectations, and a lot is changing, and there's kind of a chance to connect kind of early on and support fathers with building the kind of relationships that they're hoping to have with their children. So I'm going to open it up again if any of you would like to kind of add anything on any of these points.
Yes, I did want to share that the way our program is designed, we do have father involvement specialists who provide home visitation services for the families. They will work outside of traditional work hours. We also have the benefit of having the public health social worker, who is unique in this regard because they are the information source as well as the advocate. They can provide guidance to navigating through certain systems and services, and they're very attuned to what is available to that client and what their needs can be. And also we have on the team a public health nurse. So we have a multidisciplinary team that's able to effectively introduce the information and also share in a variety of capacities, working with the father, working with the child. And I know that everyone would not have those types of resources available in-house, as well as perhaps a language interpreter. But what I do encourage is that people try to meet those roles with partnerships and other agencies.
Thank you.
At the Parenting Network, we also offer a variety of different classes, and there are different entry points for new parents, parents of children 2 to 12, parents of children 10 to 14, parents undergoing divorce. We have a class that's just for men. And so there is a variety of times and opportunities for parents to get involved. And at the Parenting Network, we've always been lucky and able to attract and hire men who are interested in parenting to talk about parenting. And so we have men and women who are talking about parenting. It's not just mothering, it's mothering and fathering. And it improves our facilitation. It improves our ability to reach people when they can see different role models in public, because we don't have a lot of that out there in society sometimes.
Yeah, and we're fortunate enough to have one of our fathers in the program. His children have aged out, but his wife works for us as a teacher, so he is unable to work. So he actually donates a lot of his time to go out and do father-friendly checklists at all of our centers to make sure that it's as welcoming for fathers as it is for mothers. He's also a community rep on our policy council board, and he has been part of self-assessment, so that sometimes when it is just a group of women, we sometimes talk about mom a lot, and so he reminds us, how are we incorporating dads? How are we doing this to make it more father-friendly? So it's nice to have someone on the outside who doesn't necessarily work with the agency to be a part of those decisions.
Thank you. So here I want to highlight, this comes from two researchers, Marsiglio and Roy, who have written about 4 steps to father-friendly practice. And so the first one that they talk about is training professionals to support fathers. And so they talk about things like working with providers to be mindful of the nonverbal cues that they give, being sensitive to family circumstances, being prepared to make resources and referrals, and thinking about providing training to address interparental conflict that may arise, and preparing providers to work with fathers and with families, and not just with parent-child dyads. The second step that they talk about is collaborations across agencies and systems. So finding out about what else is available in your community and being able to draw on other efforts that are available to support fathers. Third, they talk about using technology to connect fathers with children. So not only the in-person programming that you can provide, but thinking about ways of supporting fathers who are not with their children all the time, whether they are non-residential dads who have periods of time together and periods of time apart from their children, whether it's fathers who are incarcerated or fathers who might have military deployment or other reasons to be apart from their children, thinking about how technology can be used and how you can work with fathers to recognize ways in which they can remain connected and stay in touch and keep up relationships during periods of time when they're not physically together. And then the fourth step that they talk about is targeting outreach and marketing for dads. So being sure that you are really responding to the needs of fathers by both with the scheduling, with having now staff available, with planning events that resonate, that are kind of responsive to interests of fathers. And so with that, I'm going to ask Lauren if you could just briefly tell us about some of the kind of creative programs that you've come up with to respond to interests from fathers in your community.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, a lot of our dads work on the road, whether that's road construction, logging, trucking, all of those different types of jobs. So this last spring, we had an event. It was on a Saturday when we knew a lot of our fathers would be home, and we did a big truck event. So we invited dads to bring in their trucks to show off to all the kids in the community. We had cement mixers, we had big trucks, we had farm equipment, we had fire trucks, ambulances, lots of different trucks from different jobs that the dads in our program actually run themselves. So it was really fun to see how excited that the kids got to show what their dad brought and what their, but we invited it, we opened it up to grandparents, uncles, older brothers, just anybody who had something that fit into the big truck event, which turned out really, really great. We had, I think, in our small community, we had 25 different trucks come to that event, which was really fun to see, really cool all the kids got to take pictures with the different trucks. Each dad got to, turn all the lights on and show everybody what they did. It was a really great turnout for our first event. So I was really nervous about, having this big truck event and not having much to go off of, but we had 25 different trucks show up, and I think we had over 100 people in attendance, not necessarily all dads, but it was open to all families. So, but it was really, really cool. It was really great. We had some raffles, some prizes to give away. We handed out flyers for our next Fatherhood committee while we were there. And so just kind of getting the word out more about how we want more dads to plan those activities, because like I said, we don't have a lot of male staff, so to have the fathers that are actually in our program plan the events is what's been most beneficial for us. Coming up next month, we actually have my dad coming, who is a hairdresser from Minneapolis, and he's coming to teach other dads how to do their kids' hair. So he's bringing different fake heads, so dads can practice on that, and then they're going to get to practice on their own children's hair. So it's going to kind of be a fun little event. With it, they're also getting a coupon for 50% off their own haircut from one of the hairstylists in town here. And so far we have about 50 people signed up, which is huge considering we get maybe one, maybe two dads at parent nights. So it's been quite successful for only having a couple events so far, but having those dads actually running those activities has been what's really helped us. So I'm hoping to see that kind of turn out in the future here, but really listening to what dads had wanted, because that was one of the things on there is, this one dad wrote, I have 4 daughters and I don't know how to do a ponytail, so please help me. So, we're really catering to what they asked for, and that's been really successful. So.
Great. So I'm going to take just 1 minute and go very briefly over the next couple slides, and then I'm going to ask our 3 program leaders to each take a couple of minutes to share some of their kind of top tips with you, and then we'll spend our last few minutes on questions. So this slide, which you can kind of refer back to when the slides get posted, offers some suggestions from fathers who've been in women-led groups, and that actually responds a couple of folks who put in questions before the webinar had specific questions about if you are a woman leading groups with fathers, kind of what are some things that you might need to know. So I'll refer you to that. And then the next slide has some conversation starters for offering ideas for getting dads to talk about what's important to them in their relationship with their child. And these are some really wonderful questions. So when the slides get posted, you can take a look at these, and I think they offer some great ideas for thinking about how to open up conversations. So now I'm going to ask, we'll start with Darrell, and then we'll go to Patrick, and then to Lauren. If you could each take just a couple of minutes to share some top tips with our listeners, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience. So I'll start with you, Darrell, okay?
Thank you. I get the impression the phone will probably ring off the hook because we have a unique design where we have our fathers are the home visitors, and our fathers are father involvement specialists are men, and they also are the ones who lead our group sessions. And so one thing that I want to focus on is reminding everyone that every father is a unique individual. Single fathers fall into their own culture, but they also are single because of unique circumstances, so we should always talk to them about how they feel about the circumstances, the relationship with the child. What we do in the DAD project is identify the percentage of time that they spend with the child, because we are funded by the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program funding, which means that we cannot share that child client with the mother. So it's exclusively the father and the child that we're working with in our setting. So we have to have access to that child, and that also means that the father is probably not going to know a lot of times about government services that may be available to him, and in some settings they may not be available to him. So fill in the blanks where he might need assistance. Often we have to define our own versions of success. So because each individual father may come from a different culture or a different environment, or they're coming to us in a unique situation, we don't expect them to move along the process the same way. We also are very deliberate in recruiting with our process in working with expectant fathers and fathers of newborns. So we're working through WIC clinics, and we're identifying fathers through child care agencies, and we're trying to promote the information at breastfeeding networks and birthing classes. We want to reemphasize that cultural competence and empathy are the keys to professionalism. So we have a non-judgmental perspective. We engage with the fathers and maintain a primary relationship with them. We encourage our partner organizations to do the same. We want to work with them so that they have an overall knowledge of not only parenting, but also of infant mortality and child development. And we want them to be able to pass lessons and messages on to their children. And we like to see this all take place by talking directly to the father versus passing messages from the mother to the father to make these things happen.
Thank you, Darrell. Patrick, can you share some of your top tips with us?
Sure. Well, I like what you had here on the list here. Allow men and people generally to be the experts on their own lives and their families, and being patient and curious about what they have to say. I mean, this is what we do as Triple P providers. We let the parents be the experts. It's your observations that matter. It's how you see it happening. How do you understand it? That's going to help you to come to what you could do different. And so when we offer that Triple P coaching for parents and for men, that's where we're really starting with, is that you're the expert. You got to tell us what you see going on, and how you see what you think you need to do differently. And I guess one of the things I always do is I do a lot of things through drawing or at activity-based learning. If you're having your fathers draw a picture of what a feeling they had, or how they got what they feel like when they're mad, couldn't they do this same activity with their 5-year-old, with their 2-year-old? Let's draw a picture of what you feel like when you're mad, and help the kid to talk through it and help the kid to express that feeling. Same thing with any kind of medium that you're using. How could you have a kid, we do some self-discovery in our classes, and how could you turn this around to say, how can I learn more about my kid by doing this same activity? Don't I want to know who my kid is connected to, who my kid trusts, and how they trust them, things like that. And so when they see it, how meaningful it can be for themselves, I say, okay, now try and do this with your kid. And so it's something, once you've learned to do it, you want to learn to do it with your child.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Lauren, a couple of quick tips for us, and then we'll take some questions.
Yeah, I think my biggest tip is to just, take it slow and really listen to what your parents' needs are. Having planned events in the past and really, assuming what Dad wanted to do and assuming I knew what activities we should have, and not having many people show up was disheartening. So sometimes it's easy to get discouraged, but to really, to send those surveys out and really listen to what the parents and the dads want to do, and inviting, grandparents and uncles and everybody else for those families who maybe don't have a dad present. We have a lot of single dads this year, which we haven't had in the past, which has been great to see them come to things and really want more information. And so just really breaking it down and working around, their schedule and making it so that we have weekend things available or we have late night events. I'm also trained in Triple P and nurturing parenting, and making sure when I'm teaching any of my parenting classes that I plan ahead. I have examples for dads, I have examples for moms, and I don't just pan off of my own experiences as a mom, because then I find myself losing the dad. So really being intentional, making sure that you're being aware that you have dads in the room and you want to make them just as comfortable as the moms, because their time is just as important. So being intentional, I think, is my biggest tip, is really planning ahead and knowing what the needs are.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Dave to lead us for these last few minutes of questions and discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Tova, and everyone else. So, I really enjoyed that presentation, and we have a bunch of questions that I want to get to. And, one of the first I want to piggyback off of something that Lauren was talking about having more single dads in your program that you're working with this year. And I kind of want to open up just, are there different strategies for engaging single dads versus some of the other fathers that you've been working with? And could you talk about that? Maybe, Tova, do you want to take a lead on that one and then spread it out from there?
Sure. So I'm happy to turn to our program leaders to offer some examples with that one. But I think, so part of that is, where we started this is thinking about communicating from the get-go that fathers are not kind of an add-on to the programming, but making sure, particularly sure when you're engaging single fathers, that you're recognizing, the full parenting role that they are taking on, and that they are kind of really, centered in the work. And so I think several of you do some work with single dads and referred to that, so I'd like to turn that to you to share some examples.
Absolutely. The fact is we follow the Parents as Teachers curriculum, and so we do the home visiting with the individuals, but we're also able to gather our fathers together in group settings. We want the fathers to meet with us with their children so that we can talk to them about appropriate parenting and have them enjoy themselves together. Some of the biggest challenges with single parents is universal, which is scheduling. And also with small children, scheduling things like naps and other routines around whatever is that work schedule or that home schedule. So we have to be mindful of that and make sure that we've prioritized his schedule and the things that he says are most important, even as far as incentives. Maybe it's not gift cards that this person wants. Maybe this person wants diapers instead. So have that conversation with them and make sure that there is no judgment around how he became a single father. That part is not as important as the relationship with the father and the child.
Okay. Did anyone else want to jump in there by chance?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sometimes I have to, like I said earlier, be intentional. And if I know I have some single dads coming to my thing, and if I have them in my Triple P seminars and I'm with some of my single moms, I have to be very mindful of how I'm going to redirect, because sometimes the mothers in my group will turn it into, sometimes a dad bashing session, and that's not what it's about. So I have to remind myself of who I have in my group, which might be easier for me because I know my parents. I know we have a small community. I know which parents are coming, and I can prepare myself a little easier than if I just have community members coming. Sometimes we do get some people from the community referred to us, but I try to know about the situation as much as I can so I can prepare for it, because I want the dads to be comfortable. Sometimes if I know we have a high interest from some of our dads, I try to plan 2 different times so that if most of the dads can come to one, and I'll schedule it so that there's different options for them, so that it's not just catered to one time and just the interest of one parent. So if the moms can come during the day and the dads want to come in the evening, I'll do that. But it's around here with the small communities, it can be difficult because there's just a lot of bias in our area, and so I try to prepare myself as much as I can to make the single dads just as comfortable as the single moms are, because we have run into that issue where the moms kind of take over the group, and it makes the dads uncomfortable sometimes. So preparing myself for those situations has been key in my area.
Okay. Thanks, Lauren. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
I was just, I didn't really have a thing to say, but if I do have a co-ed group, sometimes I will try to have a time when the men talk just with the men and the women talk with just the women, or maybe if there are more women than men, 2 groups of women talking and 1 group of men, because it does help then get the pro and con thing going and make sure that those voices get heard. when you report back to the full group. But it also gives the men and the women the freedom to talk about it in their own, with their own as well.
Yep.
I think it's also essential that we encourage the fathers to talk when they're in the groups, especially because many of them don't even realize how much they know or how good they are at parenting until they open up and other people acknowledge.
So we are close out of time, but there are a couple more questions that I want to get to, and then I want to give all of you just kind of a quick opportunity to do a final word. But one question that both Darrell and Lauren have referenced a little bit, that talks is about things, strategies that you can do to sort of plan in advance of meeting with fathers, or things that you can do ahead of time. They can kind of set that initial interaction or those early parts of engagement sort of up for success. Are there specific strategies that you found that are useful there? And anybody can jump in here.
Sure. One of the things that works with the Dad Project, usually near the end of the month on a Thursday, there is a fatherhood meeting. So our group connection is at a location that's already been identified, and we're inviting those fathers to attend. Children can attend with them. And so if there are other settings that are similar that are arranged for the mothers, I would have to suggest that if it's a program with mixed mom and dads, that perhaps the first session like that be an all-fathers session so that they're engaged from the very beginning and they get the message that we want fathers to be included in this. If it's parents are invited and it's more moms than dads, they may get the impression that this is for the moms and not the dads, and then they're just going to fall off.
Okay. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to add there?
I was just going to say that we kind of we're trying to get dads interested by making it, their choice to come. So we started with events that were for the entire family, but getting the dads to kind of run it with the trucks and stuff. But then as I'm at the events, I have, some of the dads who have been more involved going out and talking to more of them and saying, if you really enjoyed this event, we really want to get more going. Would you like to come to this meeting on this date? And we handed out flyers on those. And, just if we want to get more of this out in the community, and we really appreciate you coming to this one, but we'd like you to get more involved. So we've been trying to get more of our dads in the program out being the ones promoting it. Because if it's just me going out and talking to all these dads, sometimes it's successful, but, I'm just, it's helpful when I have the other dads with kids in the program reach out and say, we really appreciate you doing this. Would you be more interested in planning this, and what would be the next activity you'd like? And so getting our fathers out there and talking to the other fathers has been really helpful.
Okay. Patrick, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I would just repeat, you have to have activities, you have to get them talking, and go off from there.
Okay. So one really quick question for Lauren before we kind of turn to your final thoughts here. So Lauren, you talked about that survey that you sent out to dads. Is that something that could possibly be shared with our webinar participants? Could I send a link out to that if you got that to me?
Oh, definitely. Yep, I could.
Okay.
It's actually one we just created on our own, but I can send it to you if you wanted to get that out to people.
Okay, I would love to do that.
Problem.
So I'll check in with you later to make sure that we can do that. So, okay.
No problem.
For our kind of thoughts, I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of offer a wrap-up thought here. Darrell, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I want to remind everyone that being a father is a comprehensive, loving activity that requires that we be respectful and we communicate on all levels. Everything that's important to the father is what we probably need to take a look at. And if there's a way to strengthen that parent and child relationship as early as possible, I'm going to encourage that we do it and do it effectively so that they'll remember that we made a difference in their lives.
Okay. Patrick?
Yeah, I agree. When you have two parents that are involved in a child's life, you you provide a diversity experience for the child of what a parent might look like and what a parent might care about and how they might demonstrate that care and that affection and might create opportunities for you as a child. And we're not trying to raise clones. We're trying to raise children who can learn to be themselves. And if they can see that adults can be different, then they can see that they can be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Lauren?
Yeah, I just think that in closing up, it's just important to show the importance of the dads in our program, because if we have one dad come in and volunteer, it seems like all of those kids just gravitate towards him, and it's really cool to see. And it's important to remind dads that they are just as important as the moms, and we tend to sometimes, especially in Head Start, which is predominantly women who work in that field, we tend to forget that sometimes. And so to have as many dads as we can involved and a part of the decisions that are made is super important. And so, but again, we also don't want to make them feel bad if they are the one out there working all the time. And so we've had to, change how we do things and work around their schedule. And I think that that's really shown them that we value their time. So that's important.
And Tova, do you want to wrap us up here?
Yeah, so I will, and I'll just say, in closing, so first there are a few links on this slide here to some more information, both kind of research and other kind of resources, programming ideas and things for engaging fathers. Contact information is here. And then I just want to thank my three co-presenters for joining me today. They have such rich experience, and so I've really enjoyed hearing about the work that you do and learning from you, and I'm sure that all of our listeners have too. And then by way of final thoughts, I also just want to add, that there is that there's just so much potential in thinking about and finding kind of the right strategies to build fathers' capacity to support their children, that we know just how much it matters to children's well-being to have positively engaged fathers. And so, this is a learning process, and all of our presenters have shared, both the challenges that they encounter in their work and the various strategies that they're using to more effectively engage fathers. So just encourage everyone who is listening in and who does direct work with fathers to be thinking about what you might be able to try that would be responsive to the needs of fathers in your community, and to be open to learning from fathers about what they're looking for, to adapting if you try a strategy and it is not effective, recognizing that this is going to be a process, and that there is so much to be gained by engaging fathers, and it benefits children and mothers as well as fathers themselves.